everyone. Thanks for attending the practical strategies for assessing yourself in your course today. If you can just put your name, email, department, and role in the chat, and then we will go ahead and get started.
Great. Thank you so much. So I have put into the chat 2 PDFs. So these are the slide set for today, as well as a packet of resources that I will be going through. This is a webinar on really how to do things like doing student surveys and feedback about midterm. And so that's really why we're doing it right now, middle of the semester, right before spring break is happening. I've been teaching for almost 30 years now, and I do these midterm evaluations myself. They are extremely useful. They're really helpful for me to make adjustments that I need to do, and being able to get feedback from students that just is really helpful for me to make changes that I hadn't thought about. So what we'll be looking at today is what exactly is midterm feedback. And I'll be talking about this with respect to midterm, but you can do this at any time. You can do this maybe the first third or at midterm or the second third. The recommendations are, not to do it every week, but you can do these things throughout the semester, whatever helps you and whatever your context is. So we'll be looking at how to develop these types of surveys, what they can look like, how you actually administer it, things you need to think about, and how you respond to students with the feedback that they have given you. And I have also, of course, I'm a resource girl, so I'm giving you in the packet, but then also I'll be talking about it in the presentation, a lot of templates and examples that you can use that will suit what you actually need to have. And I think for those of you who have been teaching, like this quote says, every piece of feedback you get is good feedback. It's something that allows you to become a better teacher, whether it's positive or negative. It makes you reflect and think on things. And that's what you should be doing as an instructor. And I love this comment, great teachers are never afraid of having or inviting hard conversations, because it will make you a better instructor. So let me ask you guys, consider if you've done evaluations and for that evaluation feedback that you've received, did it help you make changes? So those end of semester evaluations, were those evaluations, did they help you with things you wanted to know? Yes, no, maybe, disappointing? Y'all tell me. And if you haven't done them, that's fine, but I want to see where y'all are with current practices. Yeah, some comments were helpful, exactly. Some were, some weren't. Some were just silly. Anyone else? Those of you who have taught other
I think really it is
examples?
so much helpful because in the next time when we design the course on the time we can put those type of material who give the feedback on that previous class. So I think it is
Yeah.
very much helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it because it's at the end of the semester, yes, you help the next class. The benefit of the midterm one is that you can help the current class that is having those issues or those concerns. I ask you also, so that benefit, was it actually really effective? And as you just said, some comments were helpful, but what was it about that comment that made it helpful for you? What is it, if you remember, what was it that the students may have commented about or said? Was it your teaching style? Was it assignments?
I think one time when I'm just assistant professor in the Bangladesh, on the time one student gave me a comment like I need to speak loudly because
Yeah.
in our classroom there is no any multimedia, like there is no
Mm-hmm.
microphone or something like that. So in the
Yep.
last bench, the students facing so much difficulty to hear my voice, and from
Mm-hmm.
the next time I say this to our chairman, and he include a microphone in our like classroom. Then it will
Yay.
helpful. Yeah.
That's good. And students, I mean, that's a really good point. Students may have been afraid to say something to you during the class itself. So that gives you good feedback. So it was effective for you. And I think I'm going to talk a little bit about this in just a little bit, but sometimes, the feedback can be effective or ineffective. That balance has to do with students don't necessarily know what good teaching is or what practices work or not. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay.
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to add a comment. So, I do evaluations during different points in the semester. And when I've taught undergraduates in the past, it's been for me very useful because I make changes according to what they say in these midterm, mid-course evaluations. I'm teaching graduate students now and more in the medical professions. And I was surprised because I got some feedback about some of the assignments they didn't like, and I changed them. And then on the evaluation at the end of the semester, some of the students were upset that I changed them. And so,
Interesting.
yeah. And so I'm really struggling with, yeah, so I'm really struggling with that.
Okay. We'll talk about aspects of that because that kind of has to do with whether or not you should change things and how you address those changes with the students. So that's a really good example to take with us and talk about in a little bit. So thank you for mentioning that. Yes. So with that information, knowing that basically feedback is a type of assessment. So those of you who recognize that there's formative assessments and summative assessments, assignments, same thing with feedback. There's the in-course informal as we're going feedback, which is formative, and then there's that end of semester summative. So this is definitely more about the formative assessments. With the summative ones, basically it's auditive. It's telling you what needed to be done, but you can't do anything about it. Thinking about tax season right now, not me, but have someone getting audited for taxes. So it's this capsulated view. Change can't actually happen. It's not what we call prescriptive. You can't make adjustments in the moment to help the students that you have. Now, with formative, it's educative. And so educative to you. It also, one of the really cool things about this midterm feedback, it's educative to students as to why getting feedback is important, why these evaluations are beneficial to you, but also gets them to think about what they are doing as students to ensure that they are learning. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So again, it's in course, it's informational, it's actionable techniques that you can make a change the very next week in your class. And it's diagnostic. So it can determine whether or not these methods, just like was mentioned, these assignments are working for your students, whether they then agree with you or not. Any problems or issues that you can actually address at that time. And you can get information on how well students are learning, what they're doing, and how you can help them with that so that they then can improve with time through the rest of the semester. So I do want to mention, simply because I've done a lot of research on this and I think it's fascinating, but when you talk about evaluations, people typically think of the end of semester or EOS evaluations, student evaluations, and SETs are student evaluations of teaching. And so you may think, well, we still get feedback from these end of semester evaluations. What's wrong with that? The thing is that, as we've already talked about, you can't correct those issues for the students that said that they had that issue when you could actually have provided benefit to the students. But more so, these evaluations, there is so much research out there. And I've included a couple slides at the end when I did a deep dive on this as to the research showing how these end of semester evaluations really do show issues, their questions on their validity and their reliability, because that there is a lot of bias that is introduced by students subconsciously, unconsciously, when they fill out those evaluations. And so here's just a couple of the studies where the validity, the biasing effects of likability can impact the validity of the results, whether they're interested in the subject can impact the results. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so the course that I teach in, I also course direct, and it's team taught. So I get to see the evaluations from all of the professors that teach the class. And another thing that I found that plays into this is that the teachers that teach the easier material get better ratings. And that's not really fair.
No, it is not. So yes, there's research on that. The easier it is, the better they like you. If they know what their grade is going to be, you're going to get a more positive versus a negative. Students rate. So there was one study, it was really interesting, that this was a research study where they had a female and a male professor teach the exact same course, same content, same grading, same assignments, and they still rated the female lower. even though readings, everything was still the same. So there's definite gender biases in student evaluations, racism, prejudice, all sorts of things. This Hefferman, and then there's another one, Udall, that did a meta-analysis of all these, and just they were kind of astounded that these are really actually showing, that the student evaluations of teaching that we're using for promotion and tenure actually are not showing reliable, valid data. So some of these problems, as I've already mentioned, race and age, there's not just gender bias, but gender affinity. So you see gender affinity or gender, I guess you could say gender bias as well, but affinity of females towards, say, female STEM professors and males for male professors, personality impacts, and just like you said, course level, if it's required or not, the subject, if they like it. And then these studies, especially these meta-analyses, really showed that within those evaluations themselves, the sample size of how many students completed and who decides to complete it, that is putting measurement bias into the results that you're getting as well. There was one research that showed availability of cookies during the course session affects the evaluation of teaching. And then this other one I mentioned, the ratings of instructors depended on discipline. So if you're in like a STEM field, health field, you tend to have lower evaluations compared to humanities fields. So with that said, then this being your end of course evaluations, I think, well, and many people think the midterm evaluations will really help you to, first of all, address issues. But a really cool thing about this is that it allows you to talk to students about the value of constructive feedback. And there's research, which I'll talk about in just a second, that shows that when students have done midterm feedback, usually, with the exception here that just mentioned, usually the end of term feedbacks are higher and higher ratings and more positive because of the changes that have been made. I wonder, it'd be interesting to talk about what it was that you changed and the level of the students perhaps and their experiences and past courses. There's a lot, I think, that you can unpack in there that would be interesting to talk about.
I think that after talking with other people that were a part of the course, that maybe a lot of the students that are in these graduate programs are, high achievers, and
Wow.
maybe having that change, they just didn't like it.
And that's a really good point. That's something I'm going to talk about, that there's ways to alleviate students' anxiety about what's going to change, what's not going to change, why you're making changes. So yeah, that's awesome. I love that people have had these experiences that just really kind of prove everything that we're going to be talking about. So what midterm feedback is again, informal qualitative evaluations around the course midpoint. And it is key that it is formative. Formative, that you get feedback on how you can improve student learning outcomes, improve their learning and their experience within the course itself. What's working, what's not, are you engaged, what would be helpful? All these things are questions that you can ask. Because I really appreciate this phrase that I was reading. It's a communication device. It's a way for you and the student to communicate what works, what helps them, what information you need from them to help you be a better instructor. And so really helping to see and you be able to communicate why you do certain things. So that a whole idea of transparency in why you do assessments and why you teach the way you do. And so the point of mid-semester is, as we talked about why, but really what has happened is that the students have already experienced something. They've experienced examples of exams, course elements, how you teach, activities, what your expectations are, and they can then give you feedback on that, and you can make changes to that as you move forward. And it allows you to see what is working well, what you thought would be working well that isn't, and giving you a chance to adapt that in the process. Now, I do want to mention that this is formative. These should not be used in any kind of instructor evaluations for promotion or tenure, giving them or putting them into a promotion packet. Unless it's something you really want them to see that you have been doing, that's great. Absolutely do that. But they should not be taken by your department and used for those types of formal assessments that you might get for like a peer evaluation, faculty to faculty. This is your information only. You do not have to share it to anyone except the students if you do not want to. What these can do is these can ensure, your effectiveness in teaching, you're meeting the needs of your students. What it can show you is that how the students are responding to the techniques that you use, and it will help you to be able to tease out why they're responding well, why they are not responding as well as you thought they were, because they're giving you feedback onto that why. Where are the challenges that the students are experiencing that you may not have thought about, like with the comment about sound and not being able to hear, things you just may not have crossed your mind. And then allows you to get from them even recommendations for adjustments and modifications. They can give you ideas of what perhaps you can do. One of the biggest changes that I have made in my class, I teach Marine Science 210 honors every semester, and I got feedback from a student asking me, this was actually COVID year, so I had this major project, and the project was to do a marine science issue, a controversial issue, and give the pros and cons of each and write a paper on it. It was like a 7 to 10 page paper. And the student, they were a senior, mostly seniors take my course. And he said, do we have to write a paper? He's like, I have 4 other classes requiring papers this semester. I was like, oh my God. And then so I stood there, this was in front of the class. I stood there, I was like, no, you don't have to write a paper. You can do any type of project or resource or infographic slides, whatever you want to do. I was like, that's a really good idea. If you still want to do a paper, great. And that semester I did, I had like out of about 20 students, I still had about 4 or 5 papers, but everyone else did really cool projects like magazine pages, infographics, as I mentioned, videos. And so it gives you ideas. They can give you ideas that maybe you really hadn't thought about or didn't think that they would want to do. So it really helps you to broaden your perspective. And then you can also see if you made changes from a previous semester, it can give you that feedback that you need of, is this a change I want to continue implementing? It helps you reinforce with your students what your priorities and goals are for the course, letting them see, this is how I want you to learn. These are the practices and skills I want you to develop. Are you developing them? What do you need from me to help you with that? So that really helps to reinforce, as I said, those priorities that you have. And it helps and hopefully enhance their motivation and their sense of belonging. They see that their opinion and their feedback is valued, and that makes a huge difference in student engagement and interaction with the rest of the class and with you. And it lets them see that you care about their success, their ability to learn, that they're doing what you are hoping that they will be able to do, that you're not just someone standing up, giving content, whatever it might be. And then it allows them to see what the point of evaluations are, especially the end of semester EOS evaluations. You're getting them practice to give you then at the end of the semester good feedback that will be helpful for you. And they see why it's important to do those evaluations for their instructors, because they are seeing in real time how you're taking that feedback and applying it in their particular semester. All right, so there is, as I mentioned, there's tons of benefits, and I'm obviously not going to go through it all, but research shows it is an absolutely beneficial method to get constructive feedback, both on how the students are learning, and then also, as I had mentioned, their experience in the entire process. Because when you have this feedback being given to you in real time, when they do that feedback at the end of the semester, they may not remember what had happened earlier in the semester that actually was more impactful. They just may remember, oh, I'm getting a B in this class, I'm not happy about this, or had a bad day or something like that. So it's actually much more constructive feedback mid-semester than it would be towards the end. Even if it was the same comment, the feedback in mid-semester will be more productive for you, more constructive for you, because it will be more reflective of the actual situation. research shows that students see if it's not mandatory, they are more likely to participate and so they're more authentic in the information that they provide. And with respect to what I mentioned, they are more satisfied by giving midterm feedback than they do with end of term, because they see that their comments are actually being acted upon. And again, their input is valued. And hopefully it then leads to an increased rating. So the research shows that it does, but obviously there are contexts where it might not. And that is good information to have, that if it's not showing the positive increase that you expect, something's going on. Is it the context of the students that you have? It is the context of the class itself and other environmental surroundings. There's all sorts of things that could be contributing. So some things to consider, quite a few things, and I'm going to briefly touch on each of these, but many of the resources in the resource packet that I gave you go into much more detail on this, which will be helpful for you if you decide to do this. You need that detail in the packet to help you really start to plan out, and we'll talk about that. So things like what your class structure is, how you administer the survey, what it is you want to learn, what question types can you use, and then the conditions that you create for the students when you're administering the survey, and then how you share those results back and what you do with that information. Okay. So let's look at modalities. It really depends on your context. It depends on the time that you have, whether your course is in person, online, synchronous, or asynchronous. This is a decision that you can make that best suits your class and your context. So, whether it's by paper or online, there's advantages and disadvantages, whether the data is easy to collect and analyze or not, whether it's in class or out of class, how many more students will respond in class versus out. But then you have the time issue associated with doing it in class versus out of class. But then you also have the issue with out of class. Do they remember, if you have them bring it back, do they remember to do that? They have to do it on their own time. But then out of class, you perhaps get better responses. So there are positives and negatives to all of these, and there are ways to address some of the disadvantages, which we'll talk about. Now, let's look at implementation. How do we make sure that when we do decide to give these types of mid-course evaluations, how do we make sure that the conditions are good, that the students see the benefit and give you the feedback that you need? So first of all, think about what it is that you want to ask. What are the topics of the general questions you're going to be asking? And this, of course, will help you craft what those questions will be. So are you wanting to know what aspects are working well, or what problems students are having? Are there particular areas of concern that the students have, or interests that they have that they don't see being addressed? So these activities that the students are doing, are they manageable? Which is helpful, which is not helpful? Like I mentioned with that activity, the paper that the students were writing, they didn't want to do a paper. Their role in preparation, so you can ask questions about, what did you do to study? How many hours did you spend? I've done surveys with my students where it really truly did, because they said this in the survey, it got them realizing that they probably didn't do as well on the exam, so they realized the number of hours they spent probably wasn't sufficient for them to do well on the exam. And that's part of why these are so beneficial. Getting information from what their students' expectations are. Are they learning what they thought they were? Are they getting the skills that you thought they were getting, but it turns out that they're not? So that something was missing, from the communication to the activity to the actual learning experience. And then, is it what you're doing helpful? Are you easy to understand? Is the pacing too fast? Are you having good interaction and engagement with your students? What's missing? And then your expectations, again, as I mentioned, letting students know, in a question, one of my priorities is to help you learn X. Have the activities been helping you learn X? And so it can get at them seeing what your priorities are. So let me ask you, what some are the questions, if you've been thinking about doing this, what are some questions that you are wanting to ask that you might ask your students if you did say a midterm, mid-course evaluation? What might be a question relative to your context that you would want to ask?
Some of the things that I like to ask are things like, self-reflection on their study habits.
Yes.
So like how much time are they spending studying? How are they studying? Do they think their
Yep.
studying is effective?
Yep.
Like those kinds of things. So
Yes,
that's
exactly.
number one. And that's really important for undergrads. Most of the graduate students have pretty good study habits by the time they get to graduate school. Not
Yeah.
all, but
Yeah.
most. So that was really helpful with the undergrads.
Yep, I agree. And I gave about a month ago, I gave a webinar on metacognition that gets right at what you're talking about. So if that's something that you're interested in asking students about study strategies and what works or not, watch that webinar and it gives you some ways to do this in your class. But I 100% agree that that is a really good thing to ask your students because it gets them to think about it and realize, oh, I'm not pulling my own weight here. What else? Anyone else have any questions that they have been thinking about asking?
I have one point. Like, I think one very important thing is that for the undergraduate student, group study. One question it is very important. Like, how much time you spend in your own study as well as group study. This question
Yeah.
I'll ask.
Oh, that is a really good question. Yeah, and seeing whether, if they're spending more time in group versus individual and they're doing more poorly, helps them reflect on maybe the group is too distracting for me, or that they work better in a group. So that, again, that's all part of that metacognition too. That's really good information to have. For my honor students that I teach, I often ask them, are the assignments too easy? Is the exam too easy? Because they're honors and, I am privileged to be able to teach them, but I have to make sure that I am getting them to achieve that high level that they're supposed to be achieving so they can give me feedback on that. Excellent. Now, types of questions, how many questions to ask? Again, it depends on how much time you have. It depends on the size of your class. And at the end of today, I'm going to mention, consult with the CTE about this. We know what works. We can kind of hear what your context is, what types of questions you're going to ask, and give you feedback on what will work for your particular situation. So you can have open-ended questions, asking about the dynamics of the class, your interaction, whether certain strategies that you're using is working or not. Close-ended questions tend to be better for if you have a larger class where you have a lot more feedback that you would have to analyze. So it would be easier to do it like a quantitative versus qualitative, so maybe like a Likert scale types of questions. And those questions can also allow you to do analyses, a numerical analysis, statistical analyses, which I think is fun. But sometimes some people are like, I don't want to do that. But we can help, CTE can help you with that. But it helps you to show, especially if you have numerical trends, that you can show students what the trends are, kind of comparing themselves where they are with the trend, the average of the class itself. Quantitative responses, as I said, you can get the frequency of how many students agree or disagree, but also especially for classes where, like with mentioned, the context matters. What is their demographics? What year are they? What courses have they had in the past that might impact how well they're doing in the course? And so we're not asking to get names of students. No, it absolutely should be anonymous, but you still could use that demographic information to be able to analyze what the data is telling you, okay? Their work habits, as y'all have already mentioned. And it should not take longer than about 15 minutes. Otherwise, students will start to lose interest. They'll hurry through it. You're not going to get good feedback. So in your packet, if you pull up that packet, pages 1 through 5 are, and then we'll give you some websites too in just a little bit. These are some common survey questions that can be used, some examples of different ways that you can do it. Survey pairs tend to work if you do Likert scales or just scales 1 to 5. Examples of mid-course evaluations on page 2 and 3, student expectations, student activities, contextualizing questions, as I mentioned, instructor activities, instructor expectations. So lots and lots of good resources and ideas on those pages in the packet. Now, you want to make sure that the conditions are good. Students feel comfortable, they see the value in what you're doing, and why that they are should be able to and need to provide you with good feedback. So you need to introduce what these are. They may never have had this before, and talk about why they're different, how they're different from end of course, end of semester evaluations. So introduce the mid-course evaluations. Help them understand what is the purpose, what is the importance, why am I doing this, taking time from class to do this, and what will that process be? So kind of explain the whole structure of what I'm going to do, what I'm going to ask you to do, how I'm going to analyze it, how we're going to talk about it. And the fact that these should be formative. You should be communicating with me, giving me good feedback that is actionable, changes that I could possibly make. And whether or not these changes you can or you do make, that's something else that we'll talk about in a second. So giving the overview of the process, why you chose the questions that you did. There's a whole bunch of questions that you could have asked. I chose these because this was information that I wanted to know, that I'm seeing this in exam, grades and in the class itself. This is the information that will help me to improve what I'm doing with y'all. And then how you're going to look at the data and interpret the data, interpret the evaluations, and we'll talk about how you do that in a second. And then how you're going to use the feedback. Are you going to address and implement everything that's being asked? No, of course not. But these are the things that I can change. These are the things that I will change if these are the issues that you are having. That it is completely anonymous, that if you ask any demographic questions, again, this is very generalized, just so gives me context to the class itself. And again, you should absolutely not be asking their names. And then when it's going to happen, because what you can also do is you can give them the questions in advance so that they can think about it in advance. And when you then do administer it in class, you actually get better formative feedback. But you should not use this as a connection to a grade. It shouldn't be connected to an assignment, like part B of an assignment. You should not assign a grade to this, because then that still makes students feel like they have to give feedback in order to get the grade. This should be completely voluntary that students do this. And that's why having that conversation of the purpose, the importance, why you need this information, why it will benefit them is really, really key to getting that feedback. And you certainly can have time in class to be able to do this. I actually would do that myself. One thing I think is really interesting to think about, and you should be doing, is giving them guidance on, they may have never given constructive feedback before. Their idea of feedback is yes, no, nods, whatever it might be. So what is good constructive feedback? What does that look like? Because that will help them to realize that you are not judging them for what they say. You want to hear that feedback. So giving them examples of helpful responses. And if you look at page 15 in your packet, there's some really good examples that you can give of what is good and what is not. Professor is awesome. This professor doesn't like students. These are not helpful responses. Professor was motivating. In what way? So having them see what those helpful comments look like, what the information that is being given in the comments, how it is helpful and how it is constructive. Having them be able to give you both positive and negative feedback. It's all still constructive feedback. That they focus on behaviors that are tangible, that can actually be changed. Again, those answers that you see there, it's, what do you mean by this? This is not tangible, something that I can actually act on. And then also how those things about the course, how those tangible elements are affecting how they're doing. So if you don't like this aspect of my teaching, how is it impacting your learning? If they can't give an answer, then it just may be a personality issue. And asking them to give examples to illustrate what their comments are. Like this assignment, when you asked to do this, I didn't understand this because I didn't have this type of information to be able to solve this problem, whatever it might be. Ask them for proposing alternatives, like I had mentioned with my class. What are other things that would work for them, that would be helpful for them? And this gets into that idea of universal design for learning, that having the option to do multiple methods, multiple ways of presenting, those all are really beneficial for students and helps with their particular learning. And so again, encouraging them to take the evaluation seriously, that they provide those comments, because that information is going to be acted upon in some way. You're going to look at it, you're going to reflect on it. It's going to inform what you do in the course now and in future courses. So when you're analyzing the results, start looking for trends, looking for themes. Maybe if you want to share this with somebody, you don't have to, but if someone's really good at doing qualitative analyses, maybe they can help you. I think that there are, if you have Qualtrics, I think Qualtrics can help you do this. But then grouping them into positive responses, negative responses, maybe you start to see the themes coming out from there. You may have some general comments that are just really impactful, some versus others. So you can pull those out and then quantify, if you can, those positive and those negative, because that will really help when you start talking about this with your students. Out of 50 students, 3 people said this, 40 said this. So this is where I'm going to focus on it, because this is the majority of where the issues lie, and the fact that you are 1 out of 50. Yes, this is a issue perhaps for you, but I can't make changes for everyone. I'm not a superhero, basically. Then based on those results, reflect on what you're doing relative to those results. What is it that you're doing that is causing those comments to be made? How can you make changes? What realistic changes can you make during the actual semester? There are certain things that you just simply can't do. Major changes you cannot do. For comments that have a lot of students saying the similar thing, what is it that you can do that will actually improve the course itself? There may be many things you can do. Some of them will work. Some of them are just, details, insignificant. What is it that will actually make a difference for student learning? And then which ones actually get you to realize that this was a design decision that you made that is benefiting them, and that you need to explain your choices and why you're teaching the way you're doing, or the assignments that you're actually doing. One of the things that I do is I do quote unquote attendance quizzes, participation quizzes every day. And I tell students, I expect you to be in class. I'm really not doing this to see that you're here. What I'm doing is to kind of make sure that you are, keeping up, you understand this major concept that I talked about, and you're participating. And that's the whole point, because these quizzes are interactive. They work with partners, they talk it out, they're teaching each other. So that really is the point of those types of little mini quizzes that I give. Realize you can't fix everything. So focus on those things that are constructive, that are actionable, that are doable. Now, when you're interpreting the results, keep in mind that students are not educational theorists. They are not educational professors. They know where a problem is, that it exists, not necessarily what the problem is itself. Like if they are having problems keeping up with the reading, is, whether the problem lies within themselves, or if there's too much reading, they may not be able to parse that type of thing. They can't necessarily assess your teaching techniques. So what they do is they focus on the impacts on them. So that's really from the student perspective. But do realize that they are still your best information, your only information on how this course is progressing. You can't get this information any other way. So use this to your advantage. As we've already talked about, evaluate those responses in the context of those demographics that you collected, the behaviors that you're seeing with your students in class. So, and really think about those feedbacks that you're giving. Students may say the assignments are too long, or all these freshmen that don't realize that this is kind of what college assignments are like. Have they had the experience of doing this type of assignment where they realize this is part of the assignment itself? Whether or not students say that, too much writing in a course. Have they ever had to write in a course before? Again, it depends on the discipline and whether they've had these experiences or not. And then their responses about their own learning habits. So they may tell you that they're doing this or this or this to prepare or not, and that provides context then as to that feedback that they're giving. Okay. So in responding to the feedback, this is really key. Make sure you talk about the survey and the results of the survey and what you're going to do. So responding to those results in class with your students. Tell them, thank you so much. Feedback is still feedback. It still gives me information, like that quote at the beginning, of what I can do and how I can help you. And make sure that you do this relatively quickly, within about a week or so of the survey, so it's still on their mind. And then talk about the results, focusing on the trends, the observations, so what's working well, and especially with what's working well, that really helps you to talk about your rationale for why and how you teach the way you do. Any positive trends, and if there are, hopefully that there are, giving students credit for, y'all have been doing really well with these types of assignments. I'm really proud to see y'all's growth in these types of things. And then, as we've just talked about, varied responses. Show students that they're one of a large class, and so they may have issues that others have, and so you can only change certain amounts of things, but you can still get their feedback, can still give you ideas for how to maybe modify things that will benefit them. Okay. And again, reinforcing course outcomes. This is the whole point of doing this, was making sure that y'all are getting these skills, developing this knowledge or this theoretical framework that I'm trying to get y'all to learn. And then say what changes that you can make and you can't make, and why. Why can you not stop giving them exams? Why can you not have them not write in an English class, not write papers? There are reasons behind the techniques that you use, the pedagogy that you use, and talk about that. Talk about why you do those types of things. So in your packet on page 15, there is some recommendations. Again, it says giving useful feedback to your professors is for your students. But then on page 16 is talking to the students about this feedback, things that you can say before, what the feedback was helpful, debriefing afterwards. So again, these are some ideas for you that you can implement for yourself. And then, of course, realize that this feedback, again, it's not just change for you, but helping students to understand and get a better depth of metacognition and why certain things are done in teaching and why it's helpful for students. Not just, I'm going to let you do whatever you want to do, just as long as you can answer these questions on the exams. That's not learning. So this is why I do what I do. Okay. Adjusting the course, make sure you act on the data that you have collected if you are going to make those changes. So talking to the students about what you're going to do, comparing what your original goal was for the course with what the feedback is of the students. Is it working or not? Hopefully that information, that feedback will give you ideas as to changes that you can make based on the way that the course is structured. But don't make major changes, especially don't make changes to grading. That is something that needs to stay as it is for this particular semester. And recommendations are, not changing perhaps the types of assignments or giving them alternatives is okay, but really not making massive major changes to the course. But it's because that stresses students out and they feel like maybe they won't be able to achieve what they thought that they would be able to achieve from the beginning of the semester. Makes for grumpy students. But you can do small changes, things that you can implement immediately, again, using your original goals to guide you in what to change. And reminding you, of course, not all student suggestions are good ones, or that they actually do or will help to encourage the learning that you're wanting them to have. So let me give you some examples. I have lots of examples and templates. Some of these you may have heard of that are types of active learning strategies. They are also midterm formative feedback strategies. This one you may not have heard of, but it's called Stop, Start, Continue. I've done this many semesters. So stop. When I say stop, what is it that you want me to stop doing? What things are not contributing to or detracting from your learning? What things do you want me to start doing? What are some things that would be helpful for you in learning this material? What can I continue doing? What is it that I'm already doing that is helpful and you want me to keep doing that? Page 6 in your resources packets is an example of a template you can use. Stop, Start, Continue. There are other versions of this. Keep, Add, Drop is one, as well as Like, Dislike, Continue. 1-minute papers are great active learning that you can use as just a really quick formative feedback. Let them know next class period, I'm going to give you a 1-minute paper to get feedback from you. These are the questions I'm going to ask. So, and 1-minute paper can be 5 minutes, of course. But again, these are ways that you can do this. Page 7 is some questions that you could do for like a 1-minute paper, giving you some examples of that. And then something called Plus Delta, where this is more of students are starting to think about what is working that I'm doing to make sure that I'm learning, what do I need to change, and then what is the instructor doing and what can the instructor change. So Plus is what is helping, what am I doing to improve, and Delta is the change, what changes need to be made, okay? And then, of course, structured surveys. So these are the questions asking about specific aspects where students can provide good deal of feedback that you want. So I'm giving you on page 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, lots of examples of those structured surveys and the structured questions. And I also have these websites, and you have the PDF, so you can access these websites. But these are some websites that have some really great surveys. So surveys by course modality, general feedback, online course, in-person, distance learning, seminar, lab course, practicums, clinical, just a really great resource to get those types of templates that you can, again, don't reinvent the wheel. Somebody's done this, so use somebody's template. And then this other one, building a midterm tool, database of questions and statements. A whole bunch of them, y'all. Lots and lots of examples, websites, and then sample evaluation forms. So these are PDFs and documents of forms that you can use that people have already developed. I love it. Borrow heavily from people who have put stuff online. And then online surveys. So you can use, Blackboard actually has a survey tool, and that survey tool, this is in UCV, that survey tool has analytics. So you actually can analyze the questions based on how the students have been answering other questions, comparing it to the class itself. If this is something you want to learn how to do, there's the Blackboard has a website that will step you through that, but ask CTE, help me learn how to do this, help me implement this in my class. And of course, there's Google, there's Qualtrics. There's also a really cool website that shows you how to, if you have or if you use Poll Everywhere, this website will show you how to create a midterm feedback in Poll Everywhere. And on page 13, one of the, I think this was from this website, but this was the CSV Excel file, columns that you enter into Poll Everywhere to set that survey up. So you can find this on that website. And then finally, there is one more I wanted to mention. This is something that came out recently. It's called Critical Teaching Behaviors. It is a framework that has been developed back in 2023, pretty recently, that is both peer evaluations, but also midterm feedback instruments. These have been validated by the research and by empirical studies. They're reliable. They are easy to use. This website gives you a whole bunch of information about that. But on page 18 in your packet, it gives you the appendix that book has for midterm feedback. Questions that you can use, gives you ways to do or develop the report, gives you, questions if you want to do a survey questions, lots and lots of helpful information there. It's a really cool project that has been developed by some educational developers. So if you want to try this, reach out to us. CTE is here. We love helping y'all do these things. It benefits you in so many ways. And so ask an instructional designer to talk about your particular context, what questions you want to ask, what would work for that. So you can go to our website, connect with us. There's a contact form that you can reach out to us, or just even email me. Any questions that you have, any questions that have popped up as we've been talking about this? I hope you got some good ideas. If y'all do this, if y'all decide to do this, let me know. Thank you though for coming today. Again, I'm happy to stay and chat with anyone. I use them many times. Students appreciate it. It really does help them see the benefits of being more involved in their learning.
Thanks, everyone. You'll receive a an evaluation at the end of this. And if you just want to fill that out, give us some feedback on events. And we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.